So this week's parsha is Parshas Eikev, and Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about the miraculous journey in the Midbar, and how wonderful it was. And he says, "Simloscha loy bolsa me olecha." Your clothing, your garments didn't become worn out; they didn't disintegrate. Simloscha loy bolsa me olecha veraglecha loy batseika. And your feet didn't swell. Ze arboim shana for 40 years. So Rashi says, Loi botzeika, loi nofcha kibotzeik. It didn't swell. It didn't like a dough. It didn't rise like a dough. Kederech hoilchei bot yochef sheragleihem nefuchos. Like people who walk barefoot, that their feet swell. So l'chora, it means that Yidden in the Midbar wore no shoes, because if they were wearing shoes, it's not a chiddush, it's not a nace, that their feet didn't swell as it does when people walk barefoot. However, there's a Gemara Moed Cotton Daf Tesvava Mit Beis. The Gemara has an iboya if a menude, somebody that was put in cherim. The Gemara has three shilas. Is he aser b'maloche? Is he aser b'neilas hasandol? And is he aser b'tashmish hamita? So with regards to tashmish hamita, the Gemara says that we have a raya that a menuda is not aser, because Tashema Zok Rav Yosef Kol oison shonim shehoyu Yisrael b'midbar menudin hoyu, that hidden in the midbar were menuda since the Chet HaEgel, and they were having children. So obviously, a menuda is not asur b'tashmish hamita. The Gemara says it's not a raya because maybe menuda l'shamayim is different than somebody that Bezdin puts in cherem. So there's a Tosfos over there. That Tosfos says v'shimshu. The Gemara says that there was shimshu mitay say, and Zok Tosfos b'chol hani d'le'il. Meaning, with regards to Meloche and with regards to the Ilas HaSandal, Loi Maisi mi Bnei HaMidbar, we don't bring a raya from the Bnei HaMidbar. De Lo Yadi Hei Chayu Noyagin, because the Amoyroim didn't know if Yidden in the Midbar did or didn't do Meloche, and if they did or they didn't wear shoes. That's not something that we know. L'chayra, what does Tosfos say? We don't know. It's a mefurish pasuk that they walk barefoot, because the pasuk says raglecha loy batzeika, and Rashi says as it happens to holchei yochev, to people that are walking barefoot. So obviously they were not wearing shoes. So l'chayra we could bring a raya that a menuda is asur b'neilas hasandal. However, if you look in the end of Parshas Kisavoy, the pasuk says, "V'oileich eschem arboim shono b'midbar, loy bolu salmoi seichem me'alechem, v'naalcho loy bolsa me'al raglecha." Here the pasuk says, your shoe didn't disintegrate. So over here it says mafurish that they were wearing shoes. So the emes is that unkelis in our pasuk, where it says "V'raglecha loy batzeika," Unkelis says "Umesanoch loy yechefu." Mesanoch means your shoes. How this exactly is supposed to be read, Umesanoch loy yochefu, because yochef means barefoot. So what does it mean? Your shoes didn't make you barefoot. Maybe. So you see that in spite of the fact that the pasuk over here says "Raglecha loy batzeika," Uncle has changed it to Mesanoch. He puts shoes into this pasuk, and that's avada because of the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy that says "V'nalcha loy bolsa me'al raglecha." So also in the Targum Yonis and Ben Uzziel it says "V'raglechoin loy halichon miyachafin." He says, the Targum Yonis and Ben Uzziel spells out, your feet weren't barefoot. But what does that mean? That the shoe didn't disintegrate, so therefore you were not walking barefoot. That means the Ramban in the beginning of Parshas Korach says that Onkelos is, he says, Legabe Vayikach Korach, he says, Onkelos, Piresh ha'inyin, Posar ha'inyin, loy haloshen, kedarkoi baharba mekoimis. That Onkelos sometimes takes the liberty of explaining the inyan and is not giving a literal translation. In any case, Onkelos changed the simple meaning of this pasuk. And he's learning this pasuk based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy. So also Reb Sadi Goyen says on our pasuk, loy batseika, loy nisyachfo be'ela arboim shana, that your feet didn't become barefoot. So they were wearing shoes. No, but so if we learn this pasuk based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy, to be saying that they were wearing shoes and their shoes didn't disintegrate, so then we have a clear raya that Yidden in the Midbar wore shoes. If they wore shoes, we have a raya that a menuda is not osur b'neilas asandal. The emes is that Rashi's loshen, he says that their feet were loy nofcha kederech hoilche yochev sheragleim nefuchos, is avada mashma that they were walking barefoot, because if they were wearing shoes, so what are you telling me that the feet didn't swell like people who walk barefoot? However, the Re'aim says on the Rashi, V'omar kederech hoilche yochev lohoidia be'ezen aficha kamayri. That the reason that Rashi says as people who walk barefoot is to tell us what kind of swelling are we talking about? We're talking about the swelling that people experience when they walk barefoot. Lo shaholchu yochev, but it doesn't mean that they were barefoot. So the aim is really astounding. I mean, if they weren't walking barefoot, so what, first of all, so what is Rashi telling us? That they didn't swell the way people that walk barefoot swell? I mean, that's the kind of swelling we're talking about. Well, why are we talking about that kind of swelling if they were wearing shoes? So what is it? What is the Re'im Bechlal saying is tzarechim? The Gur Aryeh learns the Rashi like the Targumim, that their feet didn't swell like people who walk barefoot, and he adds because they didn't walk barefoot, because they had shoes and the shoes didn't disintegrate. But l'chayre it's shver because Rashi doesn't mention shoes at all. Rashi says that their feet didn't swell like people who walk barefoot. Rashi didn't mention shoes at all. So how could we feed into the Rashi that they didn't swell like people who walk barefoot because they weren't barefoot? It's tzorechim. In the Maskil David, for Reb David Pardo, which is one of the early commentaries on Rashi, the Balachas de David on the Tosefta, he writes Bezeh Alosh Nire Mizeh. He writes on the Rashi that from the Rashi you see that they walked barefoot. The Ivra, however, in truth, the Hachi Mistavre, he says, and it's Mistavre like that they were walking barefoot. Shaharei Amru Rabbi Seinu Zichroinam Livracha Shahoyu Lohem Zayin Anane Kovet. Chazal tell us that there were 7 Anane Kovet, and one of them was beneath them. Tachtehen shahoya moilichon, the Ein Sufik, the Lav Oirach Ara. It's not the way of the world to wear shoes on top of the onon, and therefore the svara is that they weren't wearing shoes. Ach kosher, the Besoif Parshas Savoy, Ksiv v'nal choloi bolso me'olecha, the mashma that they were wearing shoes. The Kush Yezu here gishu bo ha-meforshim zal v'nidchiku tuveh. Ulani is daiti nira, says the Maskil David, the nal ha'amur shom al derech moshel v'dimyan. That when the pasuk says nal on Parshas Kisavoy, it doesn't really mean a shoe. It's al derech moshel v'dimyan. V'roimeis l'masha hoya tachas ragleim. It's a remes to what was under their feet, meaning it's a remes to the onon. Nal choloi bolsa means the ornon. V'zeh she'omar v'nal choloi bolsa, l'fisha be'emes loy hoyo nal mamish, elo nal kodesh. V'hainu taimid like sivena aleichem. K'moshe kosav sham salmoi seichem. We should have used the plural lashon. Na'alechem loy bolu me'al raglechem, like it says salmoi seichem. And even more so because shoes, everyone wears two shoes. So why is it lashon yochid? Avalikoi al ha'onon niche. If it's referring, if the nal means the onon, versteht man doch, it's one. V'hochi nami ose shaper might eksiv me'al raglecha. Shaharei anal utachas haregel. Why does it say that the nal wasn't bola me'al raglecha, from on top of your feet? I mean, the shoe is worn beneath the feet. But if it's the onon, it's niche. Not so clear why it's niche. But v'hochi nami ose shaper yet. The lefidar kenu niche, the derech kovid kosevachi. So he says lefidar kenu that it's the onon. So derech kovid we say me'al raglecha, even though the onon was also beneath. Umatzasi hoinli. I found a very rich idea. The B'Yecheskel, Kapitel Tezayin, it says ve'en olcha tachash, which means I gave you a nal of a tachash. And Yonason is metargim. The Yovis Masan the Ekor B'Reglechon. Masan is a shoe, the Ekor, a shoe of covet. The Ein Suffolk that the Targum means the Anane HaKovet, which are being referred to as a shoe. So says the Maskil of David. So you see that the Maskil of David is actually reading into the pasuk in Parshas Eikev as it's mashma in our pasuk that they were not wearing shoes, as opposed to the other mefarshim who are teaching the pasuk in our parsha based on the parsha in Kisavoy that they were wearing shoes. In the Aderes Eliyahu, the God in our parsha says on Simloscha the Goymer, Keneged Gimel Matonois Toivos. Keneged Gimel Matonois Toivos. V'schus Shloishes Haroyim Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Simloscha loy bolsa Keneged Habe'er. How does the Simloscha loy bolsa? How does it allude to the Be'er? Hoyam Habe'er Hoyam Etzachzeach Ufam Shaloi Hoyam Mailes Neov loy bolsa Simloscha. That the Be'er would wash their bodies so that their body didn't sweat, and therefore the Simloscha was loy bolsa. So the Simloscha loy bolsa is referring to the Matana Toiva of the Be'er. The Raglecha loy botzeika hu ha'onon shalem ava esa esrem al kanfei l'shorim. So it seems like the Goyen is learning like the Maskil of David, that Nalcha Loi bolsa me'al raglecha is not talking about a physical shoe, but talking about the onon. So there are two ways how to whether we interpret the pasuk in our parsha based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy, or we interpret the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy based on our parsha. So I mean we can understand that the Amoraim didn't know whether or not the Jews wore shoes. In other words, Beistoy said this is an old suffix. I mean, the Amoraim were already mistapek in this machlokes of the Mefarshim, whether to read our pasuk based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy or the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy based on our pasuk. And the main we didn't know, did they or did they not wear shoes? In the Karban Esanel, on the Rosh in Moed Cotton over there, Simon Dalid, Ois Cotton Samach, he asks, why does Taisva say that we don't know if they wore shoes? It's a Mefurish pasuk. Nalcha loy bolsa. Nalcha, somebody has to, I think, mute their microphone because we're hearing some ha'aris that we don't understand. Okay. The thing is like this. So the Karban Esanel says that he doesn't understand. What do you mean we don't know if they wore shoes? It's a pasuk in Parshas Eikev. They wore shoes, and we should have brought a raya that a menuda is allowed to wear shoes. So he says that in the sugya over there in Moed Cotton, it's mavur that even if a menuda is osur b'neilas hasandal, but a hoylech baderech is mutter. So he says, v'hoche b'hoylchei midbar kaimina. And we're talking over here about the hoylchei midbar. Like therefore, we can't prove whether a menuda is mutter or osur b'neilas hasandal, because in the midbar they were hoylchei drachim. And it's mafurish in the sugya that holchei drachim, even if menuda is also ben ilas asandal, but if he's a hoylech baderech, he's mutter. According to this, we would have another way to answer the stiris apsukim between our pasuk and the pasuk in Parshas Eikev, because in Parshas Kisavoy, our pasuk and the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy, in Parshas Kisavoy it says va'oylech eschem arboim shona b'midbar gomer. So this pasuk is talking at a time of haliche. But in our pasuk, it says so we can say that over here we're not talking about the time that they were hoylech. We're talking about the shas hachanoyos. I mean, 38 years of the time they were choyne. And that's why the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai, which is va'oylech eschem, mentions shoes. Now choloi bolsa, but our pasuk, which is not talking about movement, is talking about the shas hachanoya. We can say says ragle choloi batzeika, because when they were chayne, they didn't have a heter of holchei drachim. But lefizeh kum techois faket, we could have brought a raya that it's moving from the psukim that a menuda is osur b'neilas hasandal, because since only the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai, which is talking about va'oylech, mentions shoes, but our pasuk doesn't mention shoes. Obviously, they had a din menuda that's osur b'neilas hasandal, and they only wore shoes b'shas hachanoya. Yeah, and the emes is that Avad in Taisus, you can't read this because Taisus says we don't know what they did. I mean, not like the Korban Asanal who says that we know what they did, but we can't bring a raya from what they did. Besides for that, the pasuk says va'oylech eschem arboim shona b'midbar. Now, so Avad doesn't mean only the time that they were moving, because they weren't moving all the arboim shona. And b'chlal, what would be the chiddush if it's only true that they were barefoot, the shas hachanoyos, so there's no meaning to the arboim shona. I mean, so it's only during the time of movement. And the emes is that al pi the midrash Chazal, that they were carried on the Anani HaKoved, l'chayre, there's b'chlal no mokim to say what the Korban Asanal is saying, that the shas, the movement, they had a heter of holchei drachim, because holchei drachim is a heter to wear shoes. If you're a regular hoylech baderech, but if you're being carried by Anani HaKoved, l'chayre, this kula is not shaykh. I'll go put him in Toysvis. It's clear that we don't know what they did. So l'chayre, the only way to understand that is, as we said, that Toysvis is saying that the Amoyroim already had the suffix how to read the psukim. I want to add that in the ikastira of the psukim, there would be another mahalach, that maybe some were barefoot, and about them it says in our parsha, Ragla choloi batzeika, and there were amongst them those that did wear shoes, and about them the pasuk says in Parshas Kisavai v'nalcha loy bolsa. So I found in the Yalkut Me'am Loyes, who says v'raglecha loy batzeika, kivin shenalcha loy bolsa. That's his first shot. Your feet didn't swell because your shoes didn't disintegrate. V'gam elu shenoldu b'midbar v'loy hoyu lahem na'alayim. So his second shot is that people that came out of Mitzrayim, they had shoes. But the people that were born in the Midbar, where would they have shoes from? So they were walking barefoot. And therefore, according to him, we have a Pashto Yishuv, that the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai that talks about shoes is talking about the people that were Yotzei Mitzrayim that had shoes. And our pasuk that says Ragla Choloi Batzeika, that they were barefoot, is the people that didn't have shoes. That means there's a Midrash Rabbah in Parshas Bamidbar that says, B'zeh Loshen, Kama hoyo shivtoi shel Levi mu'ula mi-Yisrael. The Shevet Levi was so much mu'ula, was so much above the rest of Klal Yisrael. She Yisrael hoyu mahalchin levushei sandolin, because Klal Yisrael walked with shoes. Avol shivtoi shel Levi shehoyu toyanim beklei hamishkon hoyu mahalchin yechefim. It's got a covered. The Shevet Levi, who carried the Klei HaMishkan, they walked barefoot, and this is an expression of Kama Mu'ula Shivtoi Shel Levi. Lefizeh, we have a pasuk shot that the pasuk in our parsha is talking about Shevet Levi, who walked barefoot, and therefore the Chiddush is Nalcha, the Chiddush is Raglecha Loi Batzeika, and the pasuk in Parshas Eikev is talking about the rest of Klal Yisrael, and about them we say that Nalcha Loi Bolsa Me'al Raglecha. In the Rabbeinu Bachye, in our parsha, he says, "V'raglecha loy batzeika, loy nafcha miloshen batzeik, ki kein aminig b'holchei drachim sheyisnapchu ragleim." Mashma, that he holds that even people who wear shoes, if they walk so much, their feet swell. There's two separate nisim. One is raglecha loy batzeika, and one is nalcha loy bolsa. So the two psukim are not a stira. The pasuk is saying that it didn't swell, not swell like barefoot people, but it didn't swell like people that even wear shoes. And the other pasuk is telling us about the fact that the shoe didn't disintegrate. But then he adds another pshat. Oy yoymar ze klape halavim, shehoyu noisei ha'oren b'midbar al kosef, heim yechefim. So the Rabbeinu Bachye is pretty much like the Medrash, but the Medrash says that all of Shevet Levi, the Noisei Klei HaMishkan, were Yechefim, and the Rabbeinu Bachye says that only the Kahosim that carried the Aron were Yechefim. Now, as far as the din of a Menudah, B'neilas HaSandal, the Rif in Moed Katan says that it's an Iboyed L'Yifshita, and Sveike is Lekula. But the Rosh brings in the name of the Ravid that a Menudah is Osur B'neilas HaSandal. And so we paskin in Yeridea, Siman Shin Lamedalet Sif Beis, to try not to get in Cherem, because we paskin that a Menudah is not allowed to wear shoes. There's a fascinating Tzofnas Paneach from the Rogat Shover in this week's parsha that according to this explains the Stiras Apsukim. He says like this: the Raglecha Loi Batzeika in our parsha is referring to all the Jews who were benidui from the Chet HaEgel, and they were not allowed to wear shoes. And therefore the pasuk says, "V'raglecha loy batzeika," your feet didn't swell. But the pasuk in Parshas Kisavoy, "V'nalcha loy bolsa," is talking about Shevet Levi. That the Gemara says in Chagigat Avav that since they weren't Chote be'egel, they weren't menudah, and therefore they did wear shoes. And this is Punkt Faket in the Medrash. Yeah, and he says that's why in Parshas Eikev it says Simloscha Loshen Yochid, because all of Klal Yisrael is referred to in Loshen Yochid, and in Parshas Kisava it says Sal Moisei Chem in plural, because Pia Mavur in Hori is Davav, that Shivtoi Shel Levi is not called a Kohol, and the Mela the Yechidim, and therefore the Torah uses a plural language for the many Yechidim. And this that it says in Parshas Kisava, nevertheless, V'nal Chol Loshen Yochid, even though the Sal Moisei Chem is Loshen Rabim, is to be Miram is the din in the Yerushalmi in Shabbos that you don't have to have special shoes for Shabbos, and therefore the Torah writes only Lashon Yochid. Akopanim l'derech hamedrash. This is not possible because the Medrash says Adrabah Shiftei Shel Levi were the ones that were barefoot because they were carrying the Mishkan. But according to the Rabbeinu Bachye, we could be Mekayim both. All Yidden went Yechefim because they were Menudah. And also Shevet Levi went barefoot because they were Menudah. Also Shevet Levi went barefoot, but not because they were Menudah, because, Shevet Levi, only the Bnei Kahos went barefoot because they were carrying the Aron HaBris. The rest of Shevet Levi Taka wore shoes. So the only ones, according to, if you were Mitzarev, the Rogat Shover, with the Rabbeinu Bachye, comes out that the only ones that wore shoes were those Leviim who weren't the Kahosim, who weren't carrying the Aron. So they were not Menudah on one hand, And on the other hand, they weren't the carriers of the Aroim Bris Hashem, and therefore they actually wore shoes. Okay, so there's many suggestions. I just want to show you, two psukim, there are many suggestions about how to be miyashiv, the stira. And having said that, I want to make another suggestion. In the parsha of the Misoinim, in Parshas Ba'aloisecha, in the beginning of Kapitel Yud Aleph, it says, Vayehi ha'om ki Misoinim. Ra ba'oznei Hashem. Rashi says, Ra ba'oznei Hashem, toyano, shehiro ba'oznei Hashem, etc. Omru, what were they complaining about? Kama lovatnu baderech hazeh. Shloisha yomim sheloi nachnu mi'inoi haderech. We're moving so fast. We've been traveling for 3 days, and we didn't get a break. That was the first complaint of the Misoinim. L'chorah, according to the above-mentioned Midrashi Chazal, that there were 7 Anani HaKovid, one of them from beneath, that carried them, so what were they complaining about? It shouldn't have been difficult at all. Further, a pasuk later it says, "V'ho asafsuf asher bekirboy hisavu tava vayoshuvu vayivku gam b'nei Yisrael vayoimru mi yachilenu basar." So we see that this new his oinenus of hisavu taiva, that they wanted meat. It also began with the asafsuf asher bekirboy. Asafsuf Asher Bekirboy were the ones that hisavu taiva. But nevertheless, the rest of Klal Yisrael was drawn into this. As it says, Vayoshuvu Vayivku Gam B'nei Yisrael. It didn't remain just with the Asafsuf. Other Yidden joined also. And they all said, Mi achilenu basar. Now, the first is Oinenus. Who started it? Rashi says, Ha'om harishoin. V'toichal b'ktzei ha'machane. Zokt Rashi, b'muktzim shebehem l'shiflus elu erev rav. So you see that the first is oinenus about not getting a break and traveling for 3 days without stop started and ended with the erev rav. The rest of the Jews didn't join. But the second is oinenus, which was about the food, even though it started with the Erev Rav, it ended up dragging in the rest of Klal Yisrael. Why is that? So the emes is that, according to what we Chazal tell us, that Klal Yisrael was being carried on the Anani HaKovid, so Klal Yisrael had nothing to complain about as far as the traveling is concerned. The fact that the Erev Rav did complain is because the Erev Rav was bemis not carried on the Anani HaKovid. So it's mavur from the Sifri in Parshas Ba'aloisecha that the Erev Rav was niflat, was spit out of the Anani HaKovid. How do I know? Because it says in the pasuk, "Va'anan Hashem aleihem yoimam," state in the Sifri, "Yochol hoyomegin al umay sa'olam." You would think that the Anan Hashem aleihem yoimam also included the umay sa'olam. Talmud loyma aleihem. Aleihem hoyomegin v'loy al umay sa'olam. So why would there be a havamina that the Anani HaKovid were making on Umas Olam? So the Mogen Avram in the Hagoy Zayis Ranon to the Yalkut Shemaini says, he asks that, what do you mean that, why would we think such a thing? So he says that Umas Olam over here is referring to the Erev Rav. So now we see that the Erev Rav was not in the Anani HaKovid, and therefore the first Esoinenus which was about Loi nachnu mi'inui haderech, was a Esoinenus that only the Erev Rav had, and the rest of the Jews didn't join. The second Esoinenus which was about the food, so that already spoke to everyone. Therefore, as far as that Esoinenus is concerned, the other Jews also joined. And Lefiza, we can say, according to the Maskela David that we mentioned, that says that Avada, they were barefoot because it doesn't pass to wear shoes on the Anani HaKovid. So we can say, yeah, that's true. Legabe Klal Yisrael, who was carried on the Anani HaKovid. But the Erev Rav, who was outside of the Anani HaKovid, they were wearing shoes. And Memela, the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai that says, "V'nalcho loy bolsa me'al raglecha is talking about the Erev Rav who wore shoes because they were not in the Anani HaKavod, whereas our pasuk that says v'raglecha loy batseika is talking about those that didn't wear shoes, those that were in the Anani HaKavod, and therefore they did not wear shoes. So, in any case, after it's all said and done, I mean, we could understand that Taisus says that the Amoraim didn't know if they did or they didn't wear shoes because there are many, many possibilities in terms of being Miyashiv, the Stirs Apsukim, and Memela, we don't know if they wore or they didn't wear shoes. And you see that even though L'chayre, it's a discussion about Maida Hava, something that once was, but no, it makes an Afkamina Lahalocha, Lagabe, a Menuda, if he's Osir, Be'ne'ilas HaSandal. Now, according to the Targumim, and many learned that Rashi also holds like that they did have shoes, and they were wearing shoes. And that's why the pasuk in Parshas Eikev says, V'nalcho loy bolsa me'al raglecha. So what's the pshat in the pasuk in our parsha that says, Raglecha loy batzeiko, like people that walk barefoot? I mean, they weren't walking barefoot, so what's the chiddush? So what we see over here is that in terms of Hakaras HaToiv, this is all about Hakaras HaToiv. Moshe Rabbeinu is explaining to Klal Yisrael, telling them how much gratitude they should have. I mean, that they should be thankful for everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for them as they traveled in the Midbar. So in terms of Hakaras HaToiv, even somebody who is a Makir Toiv, usually, he's only Makir Toiv for the last step of the way. In other words, I have shoes. I'm very happy. I'm thankful for having shoes. But here we learn that it goes beyond that. You should also think about everything that could have happened if you wouldn't have shoes. In other words, if my shoes would have disintegrated, then I would be walking barefoot. If I would be walking barefoot, then my feet would swell like somebody that walks barefoot. So in other words, it teaches us how far back we have to make the cheshbon in terms of Hakaras HaToiv, not just to be thankful for the bottom line, but to see everything that could have gone wrong and didn't go wrong, and that's how we got to where we got. Like the pasuk says in this week's parsha, "V'zacharta kol haderech." Remember the entire journey. In other words, don't just remember the final destination. Don't just remember the bottom line, but be'emes, take into account everything that could have gone wrong if it would have gone wrong, and Amela, be thankful not only for the nalcha loy bolsa me'al raglecha, but also for the raglecha loy batzeika. Okay, Rabbi Sai, I think we're gonna sign off with that.